Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. Today I'm going to be doing another American Horror Story Season 8 Apocalypse episode recap and review. This week's episode is number 10 in the season. It is called Apocalypse Then, and it's the finale, so very exciting. I can't wait to discuss it with you. But first I will mention I've done videos like this all the way throughout the season so far, so I'll make sure I link that playlist up and down below in case you want to check that out. And I'll mention as well that I do begin with more of a recap, and then at the end of the video I'll be doing my review on the episode and kind of on the season in general. So with that being said, I'm just going to get onto the recap now. This episode began with Myrtle going to see Jeff and Mutt at the robotics lab, and when she approached the reception desk where Venable was waiting, of course Venable did not want to let her past. She wasn't meant to do that, and it was quite funny seeing the two of them interact. I loved when Venable said something about Myrtle's hair, saying that letting her through to see the men would be like asking her to explain her hair. And I just loved when Myrtle said, "My hair is an eternal mystery, never to be fully understood." And after that, Myrtle cast a spell on Venable, allowing her to pass through. In the lab, Jeff and Mutt were talking about the fact that they were due to be placed in Outpost 2, which is interesting, and of course this definitely confirms the fact that they're not Brock and Mr. Gallant. Once inside, Myrtle spoke with Jeff and Mutt. She took control over them with her powers, and she asked them some questions about the apocalypse, and she also informed them that they would need to allow Mr. Vanderbilt to buy his tickets so that Coco would be able to go to Outpost 3. And then after this, Myrtle left. Over at Misty's cabin, the witches discuss how they're going to get Coco into the bunker, and Cordelia explains that she'll be placing Coco and also Mallory under the identity spell. And funnily enough, they also dropped in the fact that Coco's new personality would be modelled after Madison. Cordelia also explains how they're setting it up so that Coco's family will be away and not able to go to the bunker. She also explains that she's making it so that Coco will be mean to Mallory in order to suppress her powers. And both girls are quite upset by this, since they say how they feel like they're best friends and they don't want to do it, but in the end Cordelia of course casts the spell and they are set with their new identities. Sometime later, under their new identities, Coco and Mallory are headed to Mr. Gallant's salon, and they're actually being driven by Madison. She seemed to be playing as their Uber driver, which was very funny, just speeding along and kind of messing up Coco's hair. Once Madison had dropped them off, she also happened to notice an ad for Dinah Stevens' show on the side of a bus. Inside the salon, it was Coco and Mr. Gallant's first meeting, and she says that she will employ him as her full-time hairdresser. She also happened to meet Brock inside as he was paying her compliments. Back at Misty's cabin, Madison tells Cordelia and Myrtle about Dinah Stevens. They all realise that she must have made a deal with the devil, and she has sided with Michael in order to get her talk show. Now Madison does want to burn her for this, and Myrtle takes her side, but Cordelia says they will wait. She wants to keep her safe until they can make her pay. We then see the moment from earlier in the season when Mallory was being questioned by Michael, and she displayed her first sign of powers under the identity spell. And at that moment the witches rise from the ground. They had been buried, and I would assume cast under some spell during the time of the bombs. And they were also buried in Misty's mud, which was quite interesting, I guess probably to preserve them or just avoid any issues from the bombs dropping. And I think that moment was definitely something that could be expected after seeing the promo, just seeing the hands rise out of the ground, after already seeing the photo of the witches covered in dirt. Now this catches us up to the point where the witches arrived at the bunker and had revived the witches after they were murdered. They explain the identity spell to Mallory, and of course they start arguing with Michael when he arrives. After that, it was all new moments that we hadn't seen yet, and Michael tells the witches that the world has finally been remade the way he wanted and the way his father wanted. And of course Myrtle said that really if he wanted to destroy the world, he should have made sure he got rid of all of the witches first. Michael demands that all of them bow down to him, and then he will let them live. Dinah explains to Cordelia that she was never going to side with the witches, and that surely she should have known that she would be siding with the winner in this situation, Michael. And now at this point, Marie Laveau shows up. We see Cordelia had made a deal with Papa Legba to release Marie so that she'd be able to swap with Dinah, since Dinah had such a talent for torturing people, whereas Marie did not. Very quickly Marie kills Dinah, and Dinah's soul must be taken in her place. Then in a quick and seemingly easy spell, Cordelia blows up Ms. Mead, so she's no longer a threat. Her robotic body just explodes everywhere, and Madison picks up the machine gun arm, I can assume from Ms. Mead, or perhaps it's just one that they brought with them, and she shoots Michael. They know this won't stop him for long, so the witches work quickly. Myrtle tears a piece of fabric from his outfit, and says that they'll be able to use it as the personal item in order to do their time travel spell. So the other witches go to a separate part in the bunker in order to help Mallory, and Madison stays in order to watch Michael. Out of nowhere, Brock pops up and stabs Mallory, saying that he should have been on the plane, and in retaliation, Myrtle burns up Brock, and he falls down to the area of the bunker where Madison is waiting, and this distracts her from watching Michael for a moment. Once she realizes she's dropped her focus on him, she exclaims, "Oh fuck, I guess it's back to retail," and before she can shoot him, he makes her head explode and she dies. Upstairs in a bathtub, Cordelia is trying to heal Mallory and prepare her for the time travel spell, and Michael, now that he's healed himself, follows after them. At this point, we see a showdown between Marie and Michael. She seems to cast some voodoo protection spell, or just something to stop him in his tracks. She says that he will not pass, and he's dealing with the HBIC now. Sadly though, he's back to his full power now, and he kills her, and also Coco, who had snuck up behind him and stabbed him. He rips out her heart and eats it, and then follows on further to try and find the other witches. Cordelia, Myrtle and Mallory are still preparing for this spell, but Mallory is fading. She's not strong enough, so Cordelia tells Myrtle that she loves her, and then she goes over to speak with Michael. She tells him he's a sad, scared little boy just being led by his father, and he will get to see her die, but he's not going to be able to do it, or words to that effect. And she takes the knife that he once had and stabs herself so that Mallory will rise, and this really seemed to shock Michael, and of course Myrtle as well. She was very distraught, but this means that Mallory is able to start the spell and travel back. The time has gone back to when Michael was a teenager, living with Constance, and at the moment she walked in and saw the murdered priest, which we saw earlier on in the Return to Murder House episode. Michael tried to explain away what he had done. He said that as the priest was showing him his cross and speaking Latin to him, it burnt his ears in such a whiny tone. I feel like there was such a huge difference in the way he carried himself, and that was really interesting to see. Now Constance tells him that she's sick of the horror and misery that he's brought to her house. She says that he's not her grandson, and she kicks him out. Then in a fit of rage, Michael strangles her, and she says to put her out of her misery, but he won't because he's a coward, and he doesn't. Eventually he leaves, and he walks out into the street where Mallory hits him with a car, and she runs over him and back and forth. So she's driven over him plenty in order to kill him. Constance sees this, and she goes to hold Michael as he's out there dying. He asks to be brought to the murder house so that he can live on. He wants to be with her forever, but after a moment she tells him, "Go to hell," and she leaves him there to die alone out on the street. Now over at Miss Rebishaw's academy, Mallory is waiting to meet with Cordelia for the first time, and in a voiceover we hear her explain that nothing really ever dies and that there's just more energy transference. And she also explains that she remembers everything from the time jump, but she's surprised to see when nobody else does. We see that Zoe is alive and well, teaching the younger witches. Of course there's no Myrtle since Cordelia didn't need to bring her back to help with the apocalypse, but she definitely honours and remembers her. Mallory also meets Queenie. Queenie is talking about going to LA and staying in the Hotel Cortez, but Mallory talks her out of doing this. She also explains in her voiceover that she knows that Madison is still in hell, and she'll just need to go there in a little bit to bring her back. Even Nan popped up again. She was back this time to bring Misty out of her personal hell and bring her back to Cordelia in the coven, and that was because Papa Legbo was trying to do a favour for Mallory since Mallory had killed Michael, and it seems like that would be the reason she knows she can get Madison out as well. So now in this timeline, Misty and Mallory meet, and Cordelia welcomes Misty back again. After we see all of these changes, Mallory still wonders what else will change for the future, and she knows that the devil still has a plan. Flash forward to 2020, where Timothy and Emily bump into each other, literally outside of a coffee shop that she is protesting outside of, and they flirt and chat for a little bit. She tries to get him to sign her petition, and he even briefly works into the conversation his 23andMe test results, and of course this goes back to how the government got his special DNA through that testing website. 1 year after this, they're obviously together, and we see Emily give birth, and then 3 years after that, the two of them come home after a date, and they're talking about their son. They also see that their house is being circled by ravens. Once inside, they see blood and also find the body of the babysitter who was watching their son. I think their son's name is Devon. They see him sitting in a rocking chair watching over the dead body, just as little Michael did back in Murder House, and they hear a knock on the front door. It it is of course the three Satanists. They say that they're there to help and they've been waiting their whole lives for this. And that was the end of the episode, and what an intense episode it was. I feel like I saw a couple other people say that they thought it was rushed. To me, I don't think it was rushed. I mean, of course it would have been good to see certain things fleshed out a little bit more, or maybe touch back to characters in the murder house, but really I feel like most of everything was wrapped up in a pretty good way. That being said, there was something that was kind of spoiled for me about the finale, and I didn't really realise it at the time, and that was the fact that Michael was going to be hit by a car, which I guess immediately when you think about it, it seems quite dumb, but I kind of see why they went down that way, and I'll explain that in a bit. But just because I had been looking up information about the season, I mean I wasn't looking for spoilers, but I'm in a Facebook group and I was always browsing Reddit just to see people talking about the show. I did see the photograph of, it just looked like a mangled dummy to be honest, but it was meant to be Michael lying out on the road. I saw that and saw that people had compared it to the outfit he wore after he murdered the priest. So a lot of people were thinking, is he going to be hit by a car? And I saw that and thought, not likely, I don't really think that will happen, but I did when I saw the thumbnail of the episode. It was Mallory sitting in a car, so I figured it would probably happen. Now, even though it does seem quite dumb, the idea of them killing the Antichrist by running him over multiple times, I guess in a way it makes sense because Mallory's gone back. Of course, yeah, she could have used some magic to kill him, but barring that, how was she going to take him out? It would have been hard for her to get a gun, or, I mean, maybe not. She would have had to find some weapon of some kind in order to kill him any other way, but obviously if she went back there and just got access to a car, that's kind of a pretty big weapon and for most people easily accessible. So I kind of get why she killed him the way she did, and I also would assume that she wouldn't necessarily want to get her hands too dirty, so it probably just made the most sense to her when she was going back. It was probably the easiest way to take him out. Thinking about this episode in particular and the season overall, I feel like they did tie up a lot of loose ends and most of everything makes sense now. I feel like there aren't too many questions left unanswered, which is a good thing. Of course, it was very satisfying for all of these time jumps and flashbacks and flash forwards for it finally to come full circle in the end. Really quickly, I wanted to touch on a couple of theories that I had throughout the season early on that of course panned out now. So I know early on I expected time travel just like everybody else did, and I think very early on I theorized that the witches or one of the witches would travel back in time to kill Michael when he was young, and of course that's what we saw in this episode. He was a teenager, not a little boy like I was originally expecting or a baby, but still they got him when he was a teenager in order to prevent the apocalypse. Also, I think a couple times I had speculated that Emily and Timothy would be coming back as a couple, they would have their happy ending, and I feel like for them they personally did. Obviously they were meant to meet, they met, they fell in love, they got married and had a child. Obviously their child was the Antichrist, and that's not great in the original apocalypse timeline, and now in this different world that Mallory has changed, they were due to end up together, and I think no matter what would have happened, if they were both surviving, they would have met and fallen in love to have that baby, since it really seemed to be Satan's plan B. Now apart from those things, I guess there's a few quick points I wanted to mention that I'm glad did or didn't happen. Of course, a big speculation throughout the season was that Mallory was something other than a witch, and I think in the end it was great to see that she was just a witch, and she will be the Supreme one day. Of course, it could have potentially have been interesting to see her as an angel or something else, but I think they would have had to dive into that pretty early on, and it would have just been a whole bunch of other stuff to take up time. So I guess ultimately I am pretty glad that she was a witch and that she's the Supreme, but nothing more than that. Likewise, another theory that I'm glad didn't pan out was the idea that Timothy and Emily were alien babies, or even the idea that Emily was a character from previous seasons, so if she was Lee's daughter from Roanoke. I think even though those were really good theories and very interesting to think about, it just would have taken so much time to explain, and it probably would have detracted from everything else going on. So glad that didn't happen, and really the whole thing that made them special was just evil DNA, or I guess prime DNA to create an Antichrist. Also, speaking of Timothy and Emily again, I guess it was very interesting to see their future with their son, because I think that's the most future forward point that they've reached in American Horror Story. Before that, I think it was just the flash forward in a hotel, but now I think that's the latest date in the future that they've shown, which I guess they didn't show much, but it's interesting to see the time progress, and it makes me wonder, I mean, even if they don't touch on it in the show, it makes me wonder what the new Antichrist will get up to, since of course Michael was really led by the cooperative. What will this new little Antichrist do? Again, he might not have any direction, or he could be a lot more confident than Michael was. That's definitely something interesting to wonder about, even if they never reveal it in the series. Alright, but now that's it for my video here today. Thank you so much for watching, and a big thank you as well in case you've seen all of the videos I've done on the season this year, or even just some of them apart from this one today. Thank you so much. I do hope you enjoyed them. Please give me a thumbs up if you did, and hopefully I will see you next time. Bye!